I really want you to visualize something for a second. Picture the dead center of the Pacific Ocean at 2 in the morning.
And we are not talking about, the ocean you see from some nice beach resort with moonlight bouncing off the waves.
No, exactly. Not at all. I mean, the deep water, thousands of miles away from any continental shelf, out there on a totally moonless night, there's no horizon.
Right. The sky and the water basically just merge into
Yeah.
this single suffocating sphere of absolute blackness.
Yeah, it's total isolation. There is no ambient light, no light pollution, absolutely no hum of civilization. Just the massive, heavy, physical weight of the Pacific just swelling and collapsing.
An incredibly hostile environment, even for modern vessels.
It really is. So imagine a vessel drifting silently through that void. It has no running lights. The engines are completely dead.
And as you get closer, honestly, the smell would probably hit you way before you could even see the ship.
Right, that acrid, awful chemical stench of melted plastic, scorched polyurethane, burnt steel.
Yeah, it's unmistakable.
And then you finally see it. A 50-ton commercial fishing ship just drifting aimlessly on the south equatorial current.
With the paint literally blistered completely off the hull.
Exactly. The whole superstructure is just this warped, blackened skeleton. And the most terrifying part, the ship is entirely, completely empty.
Which is just a genuinely unsettling image.
Right. And this isn't some hypothetical scenario. I'm not setting up a movie. This was the exact scene discovered on November 9th, 2008, near the remote island nation of Kiribati.
And what we really have to remember here is that we aren't talking about, some wooden galleon from the 17th century. We're talking about 2008.
Yeah, that's a huge point.
By 2008, commercial maritime operations were heavily, heavily integrated with advanced technology. I mean, we had global GPS coverage.
Satellite phones, automated beacons.
Exactly. Highly sophisticated communication arrays and emergency tsunamis that were designed specifically to take human error completely out of the equation when calling for help.
Right. So the fact that a modern commercial vessel could be found in this specific state, just a gutted, floating tomb drifting in one of the most remote regions of the planet, it completely upends all our modern assumptions about maritime safety.
It really does. It shows that the ocean, despite all our technological hubris, is still this profoundly hostile environment that can just erase a human presence without a single trace.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the mission of this deep dive is to try and reconstruct exactly what happened to the MV Tai Ching 21.
A Taiwanese fishing vessel that quite literally became a modern-day ghost ship.
Yeah. And I want to set the tone immediately for you, the listener, because this isn't, a fictional campfire story or some maritime myth from an internet forum.
No, not at all.
This is a documented historical tragedy where 29 human beings vanished into the Pacific, and they left behind this complete vacuum of evidence that still baffles search and rescue experts today.
It is a profound mystery. And largely, that's because the physical evidence we do have totally contradicts all the expected protocols of a maritime disaster.
How so? Break that down for us.
Well, when investigators finally boarded the scorched hull of the Tai Ching 21, they weren't just looking for clues, right? They were looking for a timeline.
Because fire behaves in very predictable ways, right? Even at sea.
Exactly. It's chemically predictable. But the evidence on this ship presented a massive paradox. We have a fire that was clearly hot enough to warp structural steel and destroy the entire operational capacity of the vessel.
Which takes an immense amount of heat.
Right. Yet there was a total absence of the kind of forensic evidence you would normally expect to find in a catastrophic enclosed space fire.
Okay, let's get into the weeds on that discovery because it's wild. So November 9th, 2008, a passing vessel spots this burned-out hulk near Kiribati.
And just for some geographic context for the listeners, Kiribati is right in the Central Pacific. It's a republic made up of these coral atolls spread out over millions of square miles of ocean.
It is the absolute definition of isolation. I mean, just finding a dead, drifting ship out there is statistically wild to begin with.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's the condition of the Tai Ching 21 that really stops you in your tracks. I mean, when we say a 50-ton fishing vessel was gutted, what does that actually look like mechanically? I think people just picture a big campfire.
Yeah, but a ship fire is a totally different chemical beast. It's arguably the most terrifying event that can happen at sea, primarily because of the fuel sources you're dealing with.
Right, because it's not just wood burning.
Not at all.
Huh.
A commercial longliner, like the Tai Ching 21, is essentially a floating container of highly combustible materials. You've got thousands of gallons of marine diesel fuel right in the tanks.
And all the gear, too, right? Like the nets.
Exactly. Miles of synthetic fishing nets, which are basically just spun petroleum. Plus, you have polyurethane insulation lining all the bulkheads to keep the fish holds refrigerated.
Oh, man. And polyurethane is highly flammable, isn't it?
Highly flammable and toxic when it burns. Plus, you have hydraulic fluids, paint, so when a fire breaks out in that specific environment, it doesn't just burn like a campfire, it literally creates a blast furnace.
So we aren't just dealing with intense heat. We are dealing with incredible toxicity.
Precisely. When that polyurethane insulation burns, it releases hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide gas.
Oh, wow. So you could just be poisoned before the fire even reaches you.
Yeah, a fire on a vessel like this consumes the available oxygen in the interior compartments in just a matter of minutes, and the temperature can exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius.
1,000 degrees. That's insane. Doesn't steel melt at some point around there?
Well, structural steel begins to lose its load-bearing integrity at around 400 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
So when you look at a burned-out ship, you are seeing bulkheads that literally look like melted wax. You see steel decks that have buckled and just collapsed under their own weight.
It's hard to even picture that.
The whole interior just becomes this blackened, twisted maze of metal where the ambient air itself is lethal.
Finding the ship drifting out there, it's like discovering an orbiting space capsule where the inside has been totally torched, but the hull is somehow still intact.
That's a really good analogy, actually.
Because there is no external environment to escape to, you know? You are in a vacuum. If you step outside the capsule, you die. If you stay inside, you burn.
And the physical footprint of a 50-ton vessel isn't massive to begin with. We're talking about a ship roughly 60 to 80 feet long.
Which is what, the size of a large two-story house?
Exactly. So when that confined space turns into a blast furnace, your window for decision-making isn't measured in hours, it's measured in seconds.
And this is where we hit that really dark anomaly from the November 9th discovery.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that the boarding party that inspected the burned-out shell of the Tai Ching 21 found absolutely zero human remains.
None at all. Not in the sleeping quarters, not on the bridge, not in the engine room.
Nothing. And in a fire of that intensity, if someone had been, say, trapped below decks by a blocked corridor or incapacitated by all that toxic smoke we mentioned.
There would be something left, right? Bones, teeth.
Exactly. There would be forensic evidence, bone fragments, dental records, something. The fire burned incredibly hot, but not hot enough to operate like a commercial crematorium.
Because that requires sustained, concentrated heat over a really long period, right?
Right. The total absence of remains tells us something definitive. The crew was not consumed by the fire. They evacuated.
They actually made it off the ship, which means 29 men stood on the deck of that burning vessel, looked out at the pitch-black Pacific Ocean, and decided the water was the safer option.
Which is a terrifying calculus to have to make.
It really is. And we really need to break down who these men were because it completely changes how you view the psychology of this whole disaster.
Absolutely. The human element is so crucial here.
Right. So according to the ship's manifest, there were 29 crew members in total. We have the captain, Yan Jinggang, who was Taiwanese.
And working under him was a very diverse, multinational crew.
Yeah, 18 Chinese nationals, 6 Indonesians, and 4 Filipinos. That's 29 guys on a 60-foot boat.
And that demographic breakdown is vital to understanding the operational reality of the Tai Ching 21. Commercial fishing in the deep Pacific is just grueling, physically punishing work.
I can only imagine. Just hauling nets all day.
It operates on a system of intense, continuous labor. The crews often work in shifts around the clock, deploying and hauling these miles and miles of long lines.
So they're exhausted pretty much all the time.
Right. It's an environment characterized by chronic fatigue, sleep deprivation, and incredibly cramped living quarters. You have 29 grown men sharing a very, very limited physical footprint.
The bunk rooms must have been incredibly tight, just smelling of diesel and sweat and fish.
Privacy simply does not exist on a vessel like that.
I want to push on that dynamic a bit, actually, because you have 4 different nationalities on this tiny floating island. Guys from rural China, Indonesia, the Philippines, and a Taiwanese captain.
Yes, the language barrier is a huge factor.
Yeah. How does a crew like that even communicate effectively on a normal, good day, let alone when the ship is literally melting around them? I mean, how quickly does order break down into absolute primal panic?
That is a critical friction point. On a normal day, these multinational crews usually operate on a sort of maritime pidgin language.
Like just basic hand signals and stuff?
A mix of basic terms, hand signals, and a strict adherence to routine. The Filipinos know their specific role on the deck, the Indonesians know theirs, the Chinese crew know theirs.
So the routine itself essentially becomes the language.
Exactly. You don't need fluency to haul a line or stack a freezer. You just need to know the rhythm of the work. But a catastrophic fire shatters that routine instantly.
Right, because there is no standard hand signal for the engine room is flashing over and the fire main just lost pressure.
Precisely. When a disaster strikes in that environment, complex communication is immediately required. The captain needs to issue rapid, nuanced orders.
Like, seal the forward bulkhead, or prime the emergency fire pump, or muster at the aft life raft stations.
Right. And if the crew only shares a rudimentary operational vocabulary, the ability to coordinate a sophisticated damage control response degrades massively.
And then you have to factor in the psychological element of panic on top of that.
Which is massive.
I mean, when you wake up at 2 a.m., the alarm bells are just screaming, the lights are flickering, and your tiny bunk room is filling with thick, black, toxic smoke.
Your prefrontal cortex, the logical, problem-solving part of your brain, basically just shuts down entirely.
You revert completely to primal survival instincts. Psychological studies on sudden onset maritime disasters show that in those first few minutes, cognitive processing drops precipitously.
People get tunnel vision, right? Auditory exclusion.
Yes, and time dilation. If a Filipino deckhand is shouting a warning to an Indonesian crewmate and a Chinese engineer is shouting totally contradictory information while the Taiwanese captain is screaming orders from the bridge.
It's just sheer acoustic chaos.
Complete chaos. In that environment, the language barrier goes from being a daily inconvenience to a lethal vulnerability. It paints a terrifying picture of those final moments on board. We have 29 exhausted men suddenly thrust into this chaotic, multilingual panic, totally trapped on a small steel island that is rapidly becoming a furnace.
And they weren't soldiers or adventurers. They were just working men caught in a sudden, inescapable nightmare.
But here is where we hit the most baffling part of this entire deep dive. The timeline and the absolute dead silence that followed.
Yes. The timeline is where the physical evidence and standard maritime protocol violently clash.
So let's lay it out. The Tai Ching 21 was discovered on November 9th, but the last recorded communication from the vessel, which was just a routine check-in, was logged on October 28th.
That leaves a massive 12-day gap.
12 days. But the most staggering fact is this. During that entire window, no distress signal of any kind was ever received.
None. No mayday over the VHF radio. No satellite phone distress call.
And most inexplicably, no signal from the EPIRB.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to push back hard on the idea of this being just a really bad fire.
What do you mean?
I mean, I understand panic. I understand fire spreads insanely fast. But we are talking about 2008. You don't just have to pick up a microphone and speak to call for help anymore.
You have automated systems.
Exactly. Let's talk about the EPIRB, the emergency position indicating radio beacon, because from my understanding, these things are specifically designed to be idiot-proof and panic-proof.
They are. The EPIRB is the ultimate fail-safe in maritime safety. It's a heavily ruggedized beacon, usually mounted right on the exterior of the bridge or somewhere high on the upper superstructure.
And what happens when it goes off?
When activated, it transmits a 406 megahertz signal to the Kaspa-Sarsat satellite network. That signal contains the ship's unique identification code and its exact GPS coordinates.
So it's basically an instant location ping.
Exactly. The signal goes up to a satellite, gets bounced down to a ground receiving station, and instantly alerts the nearest Maritime Rescue Coordination Center.
And you can activate it manually by just flipping a switch, right?
Yes, you can grab it, physically rip it off its bracket, and turn it on. But more importantly, modern EPIRBs operate on a hydrostatic release unit, or HRU.
Which means it deploys on its own if the ship sinks.
Right. If the ship sinks, the water pressure at a depth of about 4 meters triggers a mechanism that physically cuts the bracket's cord. The EPIRB floats to the surface and automatically activates upon contact with the water.
So why didn't it go off? If the crew is standing on the deck realizing the ship is totally doomed, why didn't the captain or the first mate just grab the EPIRB and hit the button? I mean, it takes 2 seconds.
That is the core mechanical mystery of the Tai Ching 21. We have to really analyze the failure modes of the technology to understand the disaster.
Right, because something had to have prevented that manual activation.
There are a few scenarios. First, the fire could have originated in or immediately adjacent to the bridge and the communications room.
Okay, so it starts where the radios are.
Right. If an electrical fire flashed over rapidly, it could have severed the main power lines to the VHF and satellite radios instantly.
But wait, the EPIRB has its own internal battery, right? It doesn't rely on the ship's power grid.
Correct, it does. But if the fire consumed the bridge so quickly that the captain was forced to retreat, the manual VHF and all interior communications would be lost.
Okay, sure. But what about the EPIRB mounted outside?
Well, we have to consider the ferocity of this fire. If the superstructure is engulfed in flames exceeding 1,000 degrees, the plastic housing of the EPIRB and the hydrostatic release unit itself will just melt.
Wait, really? So the fire could actually destroy the beacon before it even had a chance to deploy?
Exactly. If the flames reached the exterior mounting bracket before the crew decided to abandon ship, the beacon could have been totally incinerated. The battery would explode, the internal circuitry would melt, and the unit would just be dead.
Wow.
Furthermore, because the ship did not sink, it stayed afloat as a burned-out shell. The hydrostatic release unit never experienced the water pressure required to auto-deploy.
That implies a disaster timeline that is almost incomprehensibly fast. I mean, we are talking about a fire that escalates from ignition to total engulfment of the command and control center in minutes.
Right.
It completely cuts off the head of the snake before anyone can even react.
It suggests a catastrophic event. Perhaps a massive fuel line rupture in the engine room that instantly flooded the lower decks with burning diesel.
Which would create, what, like a chimney effect?
Exactly. A chimney effect that shot flames directly up the stairwells to the bridge. If you wake up and the only path to the brig is a solid wall of fire, you aren't going to try to get the radio.
You're going to run for the open deck.
Yes. Survival instinct dictates moving away from the heat source immediately.
But what if it wasn't a fire that started it? I know we see a burned ship, but I have to ask the question, what about foul play?
Like piracy.
Yeah, what about piracy? We are in 2008. Piracy was a massive issue in the Indian Ocean, and while maybe less common in the deep Pacific, it's certainly not impossible. Could someone have boarded the ship, disabled the comms, killed the crew, and then set the fire to hide the evidence?
It is a theory that investigators always have to evaluate, of course. But the mechanics of maritime piracy don't really align well with this specific scene.
Why not?
Well, pirates typically hijack a vessel for ransom, either of the crew or the cargo, or they steal the ship itself to use as a mothership. Setting a 50-ton vessel on fire and abandoning it in the middle of nowhere offers absolutely no economic benefit.
That makes sense. It's too much effort for no payoff.
Furthermore, firing weapons or forcibly boarding a vessel usually leaves distinct ballistic evidence or signs of a physical struggle that differ greatly from standard fire damage.
Even after a 1,000-degree fire.
Yes. While fire destroys a lot, metallurgical analysis can often distinguish between an explosion, ballistic damage, and a structural fire. The consensus heavily favors a catastrophic accidental fire rather than an external attack.
Which leaves us with that haunting timeline gap. October 28th to November 9th. 12 days. I really want the listener to internalize what that means.
It's an agonizing amount of time.
For almost 2 weeks, this massive, smoldering steel tomb drifted silently across the Pacific, and the world was completely oblivious.
I'm entirely unaware.
The families in China, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Taiwan were just going about their daily lives, assuming their husbands and sons were out hauling nets, maybe dealing with bad weather, working their shifts.
They had no idea that the disaster had already happened.
The isolation of the ocean is just staggering to me. It's a 50-ton object, and nobody even noticed it was broken until a random ship just happened to cross its drift path 12 days later.
The Pacific Ocean covers roughly 30% of the Earth's surface. It is larger than all of the Earth's land masses combined.
Which makes a 50-ton boat basically invisible.
Microscopic. Without a distress beacon emitting a signal to a satellite, you are entirely reliant on visual line of sight from another vessel. And commercial shipping lanes are quite narrow and strictly defined. Outside of those lanes, the ocean is an empty desert.
Which brings us to the most agonizing, purely human element of this entire investigation, the life rafts.
This is where the story gets incredibly dark.
When the boarding party inspected the Tai Ching 21, they naturally took an inventory of the survival gear, right? The ship's manifest lists all the required safety equipment.
Right?
And what they found, or rather what they didn't find, changes the entire narrative, from a story about a fast-moving fire to a prolonged, agonizing struggle for survival.
The boarding party confirmed that 1 lifeboat and 3 inflatable life rafts were missing from the vessel.
Gone completely.
Furthermore, they found no remnants of these rafts in the immediate vicinity of the hull, nor were there any melted remnants of the rafts still attached to their deployment cradles.
Because if they just burned up on the deck, you'd find the melted rubber and the heavy metal gas cylinders used to inflate them.
Exactly. The CO2 inflation cylinders are heavy steel. They would easily survive the fire. The absence of those cylinders in the missing lifeboat strongly suggests a successful deployment.
Wow. So that means that amidst the smoke, the blistering heat, the acoustic chaos of the fire, and the language barriers, the crew actually managed to execute an organized physical evacuation.
They did, which is an incredible feat under those circumstances.
I want to break down the mechanics of what that actually entails because stepping off a ship into the Pacific is not some casual decision.
Not at all.
Let's look at the psychology and the physics of abandoning ship. Imagine you are standing on that deck. Behind you, the ship is roaring. The heat is literally blistering the paint off the steel.
The sound alone would be deafening.
But in front of you is the deep ocean at night. What goes through a mariner's mind in that exact second? To choose the water over the ship.
It is often described by survivors as the most unnatural decision a human being can possibly make.
Unnatural how?
Well, a ship, fundamentally, is an engineered fortress designed specifically to keep the ocean out. For a sailor, the steel hull beneath their feet is their entire world, their only safety.
It's all they have.
Right. So to willingly step off that steel deck and entrust your life to a small, inflatable piece of rubber or a fiberglass shell goes against every deeply ingrained survival instinct you have.
Because you are looking down into a black void. You know the water temperature, you know the depth, you know what lives in it.
The psychological threshold you have to cross to make that jump means the environment behind you must be absolutely, unequivocally unsurvivable.
But the physical act of launching those rafts is complex too, isn't it? I mean, it's not just throwing a pool float into the water and jumping in.
No, deploying a commercial life raft requires a lot of physical coordination. They are housed in these heavy fiberglass canisters. Yeah. The crew has to ensure the painter line, which is a long, strong rope attached to the raft, and the ship is securely tied off to a strong point on the deck. Then, they have to physically heave the canister overboard.
Right.
As the canister hits the water, the crew pulls the painter line tight. This physical tension triggers the CO2 cylinder, which inflates the raft violently in a matter of seconds.
But they're doing all of this in the dark, with a massive fire raging right behind them.
Yes, and while the ship is likely pitching and rolling heavily, because without engines, the vessel is entirely at the mercy of the waves.
That's terrifying.
Once the raft is inflated, the crew has to physically embark. They either have to jump into the water and swim to it, or they use a precarious embarkation ladder.
Jumping in the dark into freezing water.
If they jump, they risk hypothermia, swallowing seawater, or worse, being crushed between the raft and the steel hull of the ship as it rolls.
Oh, man.
It's a highly dangerous maneuver, even in broad daylight during a calm drill. Doing it at night, during a catastrophic emergency, is just a nightmare.
And the fact that they deployed 3 rafts and a lifeboat means they likely got everyone off. 29 men, split among these tiny survival craft.
It's highly probable they all made it into the rafts, yeah.
Oh, but let's follow that timeline. They get in the rafts, they take out their knives, and they cut the painter line, severing their connection to the burning ship so they don't get dragged under if it sinks.
That is the crucial moment, cutting the line.
For a few minutes, there has to be an intense rush of adrenaline and relief, right? They beat the fire, they are alive, the raft's inflated.
A brief moment of salvation.
But then, as the current catches them, they start to drift away from the Tai Ching 21, and as the ship gets further away, the roaring of the flames gets quieter, the light from the fire starts to fade.
The darkness closes back in.
And suddenly, the reality of their situation fully sets in.
The psychological transition from that high adrenaline escape to the slow, creeping terror of isolation would be absolutely devastating.
Because now they're just floating.
They're now sitting in small rubber rafts, mere inches above the surface of the water. They're likely soaking wet, freezing, and suffering from smoke inhalation or minor burns.
And the scale of the ocean hits them.
Exactly. The ocean is vast, and the waves feel infinitely larger when you're sitting at water level rather than up on the deck of a commercial ship.
And here is the truly horrific part, tying back to the communication failure we talked about earlier. The captain, sitting in one of those rafts, knows a secret that the rest of the crew might not fully grasp yet.
Yes.
He knows that the EPIRB didn't go off. He knows that absolutely no mayday was sent.
The leadership on those rafts would be agonizingly aware of their reality. You see, standard maritime survival doctrine relies heavily on the premise that rescue is imminent.
Right, you just have to hold on until the helicopters arrive.
Exactly. The rations in a life raft, these small packets of high-calorie biscuits and limited pouches of desalinated water, they are designed to sustain life for a few days, maybe a week, under the strict assumption that a search and rescue operation is already underway.
But without a distress signal, the clock isn't ticking down to a rescue, it's just ticking.
They are sitting in the dark, watching the sun come up on an entirely empty horizon, knowing that literally no one on Earth is looking for them.
The human body can only survive without water for a few days, right?
Yeah.
Especially in an environment where you have exposure to salt spray, wind, and glaring sun.
All of which rapidly accelerates dehydration.
The psychological toll of watching the days pass, rationing tiny sips of water, trying to maintain order and hope among a multinational crew in a confined rubber space. I mean, it's unimaginable.
Despair is just as lethal as exposure in these scenarios. When hope dies in a life raft, the physical decline happens much, much faster.
Which makes the subsequent search effort incredibly heartbreaking, because when the authorities finally did learn about the ship on November 9th, they didn't hold back.
No, they launched a massive operation.
The U.S. Air Force, the New Zealand Air Force, the U.S. Coast Guard, we are talking about a search grid covering 21,000 square miles of ocean north of Fiji.
The assets deployed for this search were top-tier military grade. They utilized a U.S. Air Force C-130 Hercules and a New Zealand Air Force P-3 Orion.
And to understand why the failure of this search is so baffling, we really need to understand the technology aboard these specific aircraft.
Right. These are not just normal planes with guys looking out the windows with binoculars.
Let's break down the tech, because I think people hear airplane and just think of a commercial flight. What makes a P-3 Orion a sub-hunter and a search and rescue machine?
The P-3 Orion was originally designed for anti-submarine warfare during the Cold War. It is literally built to find things that are actively trying to hide in the ocean.
Okay, so it's got crazy sensors.
It is equipped with advanced surface search radar, capable of detecting incredibly small radar cross-sections, things like the periscope of a submarine, or, in this case, the metallic components of a life raft.
And it uses thermal imaging, too, right?
Yes, it utilizes FLIR, forward-looking infrared, which detects minute differences in heat signatures on the surface of the water.
So if there is a rubber raft with humans inside, emitting 98.6 degrees of body heat, floating on an ocean that is, say, 70 degrees, the FLIR should see it glowing like a beacon on their screens.
In theory, yes. The thermal contrast should make them highly visible. Additionally, survival rafts are painted international orange.
Which is specifically chosen because it contrasts sharply with the blue and gray spectrum of the ocean, right?
Exactly. They are also equipped with retroreflective tape to bounce radar waves back to the search plane. The aircraft fly highly calculated search patterns, usually spanning squares or parallel tracks.
They use software for that now, don't they?
Yes, software that factors in the wind speed, the ocean current, and the leeway of the target.
Leeway being how the wind pushes the physical shape of the raft across the water, completely separate from how the current moves the water itself.
Precisely. A rubber raft sits very high in the water, so it acts like a sail. It will drift significantly faster and in a completely different direction than the submerged, heavy hull of the Tai Ching 21.
So they plug all this into a computer to guess where the rafts went.
The search coordination centers plug all this data into a complex model to generate a probability area.
But here's the math that makes this so humbling. 21,000 square miles. Let me try to put that in perspective for you, the listener. The entire state of Maryland is about 12,400 square miles.
It's an immense area.
So imagine taking the state of Maryland, almost doubling it, and then removing every landmark, every road, every mountain. Make it completely flat, but constantly moving and undulating.
A moving liquid desert.
Right. Now, take 4 tiny rubber dots, drop them somewhere in that space, and then blow a massive fan across it so the dots are constantly changing location at varying speeds. The planes are flying at hundreds of miles an hour above this moving map, trying to find those 4 dots.
It is the ultimate needle in a haystack scenario, where the haystack is a dynamic, fluid environment.
It seems impossible when you put it like that.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of maritime search and rescue, it really exposes the limitations of our technology against the sheer scale of the environment.
Because the sensors aren't perfect.
Right. Infrared sensors are powerful, but they suffer from what we call thermal clutter. If the waves are churning, reflecting sunlight, or if there is a localized weather system, the thermal signature of a raft can be completely masked.
And there's thermal crossover, too. Like, if the sun heats the surface of the rubber raft to the exact temperature of the surrounding water, the camera literally goes blind to it.
Exactly. The contrast disappears. And radar requires a direct line of sight. If the raft happens to be in the trough of a massive ocean swell when the radar sweeps over, the wave itself blocks the signal.
So they could fly right over them and not see them.
The aircraft were searching a massive grid, but if the initial calculations of the drift vectors were even slightly off due to anomalous localized currents, the planes might have been executing perfect search patterns in an area of the ocean where the rafts simply weren't.
But even if they missed the intact rafts, wouldn't they find something? I mean, the ocean is violent. If a storm came through and capsized the rafts, or if they eventually deflated, wouldn't there be a debris field?
You would certainly expect debris, yes.
Like an orange survival suit, a plastic ration container, a piece of the fiberglass lifeboat, something.
But the ocean is uniquely efficient at scattering and sinking evidence. A life raft is buoyant, but if it capsizes and sustains structural damage, it will eventually flood and sink.
And the crew.
If the crew perished from exposure, their bodies would slip into the water and be lost almost immediately. Small pieces of plastic or foam might float, but finding a single floating ration packet in 21,000 square miles of white caps is nearly impossible.
It just erases everything.
The ocean doesn't just hide things. It disperses them across hundreds of miles of deep water and then swallows them whole.
It is a masterclass in existential dread. I mean, they searched for days. The C-130s and the Orions burned thousands of gallons of jet fuel, scanning the surface with the best technology humanity has to offer, and they found absolutely nothing.
Just miles and miles of rolling blue water.
The failure of the search operation forces us to confront the grim reality of those 12 days of silence. By the time the Tai Ching 21 was discovered and the search grid was finally established, the crew had been adrift for nearly 2 weeks.
And even with perfect discipline and rationing, the biological limits of survival in an open raft would have been stretched to the absolute breaking point by then.
Which brings us to the legacy of this ship. When we look at maritime history, there is always this fascination with ghost ships. Everyone knows the story of the Mary Celeste from 1872, found drifting in the Atlantic with no crew.
A classic maritime mystery.
Right. But it's easy to look back at the 1800s and think, well, they didn't have radios, they didn't have GPS. Of course, mysteries happened back then. But the MV Tai Ching 21 happened in 2008.
And that temporal proximity is exactly why this case is so deeply unsettling. It shatters the modern illusion of safety.
We really do think we're invincible now.
We live in an era where we can track a pizza delivery on our phones with pinpoint accuracy. We assume that connectivity is absolute, that technology has conquered geography.
But the Tai Ching 21 proves that this is a complete fallacy.
Once you leave the continental shelf, once you enter the deep ocean, you are returning to a primal environment. You are in a wilderness that operates by its own physical laws, and it is entirely indifferent to your technology.
The ocean doesn't care about your EPIRB, your hydrostatic release units, or your thermal imaging cameras. It doesn't care about the nationality of your crew or the cargo in your hold.
It is completely unbiased in its lethality.
The tragedy of Captain Yan Jinggang and his 28 men is a monument to human vulnerability.
It is a somber reminder of the physical courage required to work the sea. Every time a commercial crew casts off their mooring lines, they are accepting a fundamental risk.
They are entering an environment that, at best, tolerates their presence.
And at worst, can destroy them with a sudden, localized violence that leaves absolutely no trace. The story of the Tai Ching 21 is a study in cascading failures, a catastrophic fire, a critical communication breakdown, and the overwhelming, unconquerable vastness of the Pacific.
So, what does this all mean? We've analyzed the mechanics of the fire, the failure of the EPIRB, the psychology of abandoning ship, and the limitations of modern search and rescue.
It's a lot to process.
I think fundamentally it means that despite all our engineering and all our arrogance, there are still places on this planet where humanity simply does not have the final say.
I agree. It forces a deeply humbling perspective. We can build stronger hulls and better beacons, but the ocean remains an untamed frontier.
The fact that 29 men could vanish without a single radio transmission, leaving only a burnt shell as a testament to their existence, is a haunting reality that maritime professionals have to live with every day. The search was eventually called off. The C-130s returned to base. The files on the Tai Ching 21 were closed, categorized as an unresolved maritime disaster.
And the families were left with an agonizing lack of closure. A mystery without a body, without a final message.
I want you to think about this tonight, when you turn off the lights. The world moved on. But somewhere out there, in the unfathomable depths of the Pacific Ocean, driven by cold currents hundreds of miles from where they started,
the missing lifeboats of the Tai Ching 21.
And the final, terrifying answers to what truly happened to Captain Yan Jinggang and his men in the dark, they are still out there, drifting silently in the void or resting quietly on the ocean floor, keeping their secrets forever.